In this section you will learn about Azure App Services. You will learn how to create an app service, how to manage it, and how to deploy something to it. I will start by diving into what an Azure App Service exactly is and why I'd want to use it. Then I'll create one, which allows me to cover app service plans. In essence, an app service plan defines a set of compute resources, the operating system you want to use, the number of virtual machine instances that are fired up, how capable those instances are, and so on. In Azure, things can rarely be done in just one way. An app service, for example, can be created and managed via the portal, but you can also do that via the CLI and to a certain extent via Visual Studio. We will have a look at that. Then we will learn how to deploy something, an API in our case, to the app service. We will look at how to deal with application settings, additional development tools, and important, how to scale up or out. That's a lot of content to cover. No time to waste. Let's dive in. In the previous module, I've shown you an app service resource during our lab around the portal. I used it as an example of a resource that you can host a web app on. And that is exactly what it is for hosting web apps, APIs, or other web-based backends like one you may need for a mobile app. You don't have to worry about infrastructure. The app service is a platform as a service type of service, so all of that is handled by Azure for us. Through an app service, you can thus develop web apps, APIs, and things like that. You can also easily scale this, and you can easily integrate with other Azure services like Azure Storage, Azure SQL, or Microsoft Entra ID. As you can see on screen here, you can also develop in your preferred language. And that goes for a lot of things on Azure. Azure is not limited to .NET. A multitude of languages are supported, in this case including but not limited to ASP.NET Core, Java, Node.js, PHP, and Python. You can run those on Windows or Linux. This is a .NET course, so I'm going to use ASP.NET Core. Let's do that next. So, first things first, we need something to publish. An API in our case. The one I'm going to use is the one you can see on screen now. It's an API based on an API I've built in a previous course here on Dome Train about vertical slice architecture. It's a travel inspiration API, and you can use it for managing destinations, itineraries, stops, and so on, all things related to travel. You don't need to know about the vertical slice architectural style to be able to follow along. I essentially just needed something to publish. If you're not familiar with that style, essentially the idea is to organize your code in vertical slices instead of in horizontal layers. Let me quickly run through the get itineraries slice or feature so you can get a feeling of how the code is organized. Typically in vertical slice architecture you would have one slice per feature or user story if you wish, and in that slice all that's related to that feature is contained. The main idea is that what's in this slice should not be used by other slices. So what that typically looks like is that you would have a way to map your endpoint. In this case, GET requests are mapped to API/itineraries. So if you send something like that, you will end up here. Then I used the mediator pattern to send an I request. The I request in this case is of type GET itineraries query, which allows me to pass through data, in this case search for, the string to search for, to whatever is going to handle this query. The handler of that query, that's defined a few lines down here, the get itineraries handler. It gets the incoming request, the query, passed in, and that can then be used to get a hold of that search for value we passed through. It's in this handler that the actual logic happens. So it's in this handler that I call into the database to get the itineraries, to filter them, to map them to itinerary DTOs, and return the results. So essentially it's a pretty straightforward way of organizing your code and architecting your solutions that is a very good fit for request response style applications. What you also see regarding code organization in this case is that I have a tendency to put all the classes that should only be used by this slice in the same physical place. That's why you see the itinerary DTO class defined in this getitineraries.cs file. That's why you see the automapper map profile defined here, the handler, the query, and the mapping of the endpoint itself. These things should not be used outside of this feature, and they belong together, so I also put them together physically. They are, of course, still logically separated. Alright, so far for that quick run through. Now, I mentioned that this is a Travel Inspiration API built in that other course, but that's not completely correct. This version of this API is fully in development. It's about halfway through, let's say, so not everything is implemented. There may be a bug here or there. Some things could be optimized. In other words, this is your run-of-the-mill API during a development phase, as we are all used to. We will use this one throughout the course and use it to build a few things. In this section, it will mainly be used as a thing to deploy and a way to work with application settings. In the upcoming sections, we'll integrate certain endpoints with Azure Storage, another one with Azure SQL, and I'll make sure that all of this can be monitored nicely. But that's coming up later. For this current section, I'm going to use the search destinations slice. Any GET request sent to API/destinations with a potential search for query string value ends up here. And if you look at the handler for this, you can see that it actually doesn't call into a database or any other storage option. This is just a list of hard-coded destinations that are filtered by that search for query string value. So this is a pretty standalone piece of code that will make it easy for us to learn things about Azure without being overwhelmed with other things. The one thing that is important here to notice is that the amount of destinations that are returned are limited to the amount to return, which is coming from the app settings file. So if I have a look at the app settings file, I can find an amount to return here. That's important because we will use this during this section. And that is all we need to know about this solution for now. Let's create the app service we're going to host this API on next. There's multiple ways to do that. Common approaches are via the Azure portal, via the Azure CLI, or via Visual Studio. I'll cover all three of these.